Okay, so welcome everybody. We're back for session 3. Kathy, do you have anything to say before we get started?
No, I'm good for today. Thanks.
Well, thank you for communicating with everybody and making sure everybody has links and knows what the homework is, and for getting the PowerPoints out early. That's really terrific. Okay, I'm going to pull up our slideshow from today. You all have it, and I think we're ready to go. So this is session 3 of the Siskiyou County Grant Writing Workshop Series. Again, this is the first time we've done this as a webinar series. And so thanks for being our pilot group. So what are we going to be doing today? Well, the first thing we'll do is we'll do a little debrief about the work that we talked about in session 2, and then your homework to kind of really help you apply what we learned about storytelling. We're going to keep telling stories this session, but instead of using words, we're going to use more numbers to tell a resource story. And then at the very end, I'll be sharing some budget homework for you so you can get some chance practicing what we're going to talk about in today's session. We have another funder who's going to join us today at 4:15. Megan Kahn is the program officer from the Community Foundation of the North State, and she'll be joining us. She has her own PowerPoint that she will use to help you learn more about how to apply to them. And I think we're ready to go. So I have to say, I've been really delighted with the one-pagers that have come in. I've made just some really small suggestions. They look great. You guys really understand the idea of the story, the need statement, the project description, and then the outcomes. So I'm happy to see those, and I will continue to review them and get them back to you as you get going. But what I'd like to hear now, and Kathy, do you have our coffee cards and Amazon cards ready?
I do.
So anybody that wants to share a success story, we're ready to hear information from you about doing the one-pager homework, about finishing the project charter and sharing it with the organization, or in some way, how did you use the content from this series to move your grant program forward? And I'm going to stop sharing so I can see everybody. So who has a story they'd like to share?
Can I talk about a project I used a one-pager on in the past?
Yes, you can.
Okay, so the project behind me is the addition to the Butte Valley Community Center project, and the first one-pager I really worked on was we met with the COO of the McConnell Foundation with a group from the community, and we worked on this one-pager, and I just saw the power of that, to have it all lined up and well thought out, and just to walk in with that and present that, just it really made it seem like a slam dunk after that, because I don't know, it was just there, and it was easy to see, and it was more about meeting us and seeing who was there in the group, and it wasn't really about the project anymore. It was just like meeting us and feeling the community support behind it, because we'd done our homework.
So thanks, George. So, and if it's not obvious, George took this class before. So he learned both about the project charter and the one-pagers.
But so I had to drive to Lakeview about 4 times. So that's from about 5 in the morning to get there in time. So this is much easier.
Yeah, it is. So let me ask you this, George. Do you use both the project charter and the one pager for every project?
I use the one pager for sure, especially if I have to go present it. You've got to, for me personally, I need to break it down into the really key parts. Otherwise I can go tell a story for a while and really I need to make sure I have thought about it. Those points are there that need to be met, and really shared with the group, and everybody has, because when we walked in with 4 or 5 people, we wanted to have the same story and the same points. If they asked someone else, I didn't want to be the only one talking, so everybody knew the points.
Yep. So you used it internally so that you had the same shared message, and then obviously it's now a tool for you to start a conversation about the project. Great.
Yeah.
Thanks, George. And George, did you want a Starbucks card, Dutch Brothers, or an Amazon card? You're muted now.
I'll take a Starbucks. They're about a block from my office in Wairika, so I'll take it.
Okay, who else has something they'd like to share about work on their project or the use of either the project charter or the one pager? Or just about the challenge of getting that homework done?
Okay, I'll talk. Or Ernie, do you want to talk?
Great. Was that you,
Okay.
Michelle? Oh,
No.
great. Amy.
So I work in it's a small rural community association, right? So, and I've written this year like 7 grants and got about 5 of them. And so I think my board thinks I'm just magic or something, like it just works out of magic. And so get it to show them the slides and the things that pre-planning stuff has been very eye-opening for them. And just talking about what is our capacity? What are we doing? What are we able to do? And try to make them go through these worksheets with me so that they can realize that it's not a magic thing that happens just at the end and they just sign things and stuff. So that's very helpful, because we hadn't done anything like this before this year. So I think that was something they needed to see, the long process, and that the little triangle at the top, that was just the writing part, right? That part's not so hard.
Right, and it was
Everything
a
else.
way for you now to get them to start asking, well, how can we help with the planning parts, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and getting a more realistic timeline for the things that they want. Because so.
Great, very nice comment. Amy, Starbucks card, Dutch Brothers, or Amazon?
Amazon, because we don't have any coffee shops here.
That's actually why Kathy got all 3 of the choices, because some communities had Dutch Brothers, others had Starbucks, and some of your communities had none. And where are you from again, Amy?
I'm in Hornbrook, California.
Yeah, thanks. Okay, great. Ernie, did you have a story for us?
I didn't finish my one-page statement, but I did sit down with the founder and one of the founders of the art museum and who owns our building, and we talked about us buying the building, and he's agreeable to that. And we talked about whether it's going to be partially fundraising and partially either bank loan, and he offered to finance it himself. And then he talked about going through a realtor who's a good friend of his. So I've sent messages to the realtor that just went through the whole thing, the whole project, and just wanted to sit down with the realtor in this next week or 2 and talk about time frame for the next year. So, and then tonight is our board meeting at the museum. So tonight I'm going to lay out everything that I'd like to see do next year. And so tonight's the night to get people on board, and then we're going to have we already scheduled a board retreat, all-day retreat in January, which is when we usually do one for the new year. So I'm suggesting that that's the whole theme of the meeting in January.
Terrific. Will you share your project charter tonight?
I'm not sure if we have enough time. I will definitely share it in January.
Okay, great. And you'll have your one pager by then too.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Hopefully by next week.
So think about the board members. Getting those tools from you is going to make them much more likely to turn around and share the information about the project with others too, right?
Right.
Yeah. So you really now have your marketing hat on for community support for the art museum. So good for you.
And also in networking, I heard about a person who had talked to somebody else about wanting to be involved for a fundraiser for Sam. So after the board gets on board, I need to approach this person that I don't know that well, but who's influential in our community. And that they told somebody else, but haven't approached us yet. That seems to be a perfect opening. But I gotta get my cards lined up in a row, or however you say that.
Terrific. Well, speaking of cards, would you like it to be an Amazon card, Dutch Brothers, or Starbucks?
Amazon.
Okay, great. And any other last story? Justina, do you have the ability to mute yourself?
Yes, sorry, I was trying to get it to connect to the phone.
Great, we can hear you just fine. Great. Anybody else have a story? Okay, I'm going to go back then to sharing my screen. And Kathy, can you see this? Is that showing?
Yes, I can see the PowerPoint. Mhm.
Yeah.
It was showing.
Okay, good.
Mhm.
Okay, success stories. And I'm gonna, there's a certain order I have to do this. Okay, so today we're going to talk about budgets. And the first slide I'm showing is that kind of a definition for budget are that they plan the work that you're going to be doing. So future work that your organization is going to be doing. So when you hear work to be done, especially in quotes, I've said that before. Where did that come up before in our previous conversation? Well, it came up when we looked at these three circles that define in orange your mission, and in blue and green, the strategic thinking or planning elements of what you should be doing. And we said that the intersection of those is the work to be done. So now in the context of budget day, we're taking that work that you've filtered out, and now we have to mathematically model what's your capacity to do it, and how are you going to find the resources to pay for it. So if we used our mission and strategic planning to get to our budget, that kind of begs the question of how do you do budgeting without strategic planning, right? So I'd like to ask for a couple of people to share how your organization goes about strategic planning. Have you ever done a strategic plan? or how long has it been since your organization has had a strategic plan? So let's hear some thoughts about that.
Hi.
Hi, Abby. What do you guys, when's the last time you guys had a strategic plan at Happy Camp Community Action?
We did some strategic planning in August.
And what was it like? What happened?
It was good. I did it with the staff had been asking to do it. So Justina and Linda and Nikki did it with us, and so did Abby Tower. It was good. I've done strategic planning before at other jobs, and so I went through we did kind of the steps. I had a PowerPoint that I used for a contract that I had, and we did it together, and it was really great, and we had a good plan, and we were getting ready to implement that, and then the Slater fire happened. So
yes. Okay. So you led your own strategic planning process. You had some experience with it,
yeah.
and it really helped make your staff feel engaged in the process. Perfect.
Yeah, it was great. We went through our mission, vision, values. We did our SWOT analysis. We did start, stop, continue, and change.
Great.
We came up with our key issues or key indicators, and then when I did strategic planning, we were taught to pick 3 WIGs, wildly important goals, and we picked 3 or 4. Anyway, went through that, and we had gotten all the way to that point, and then we were starting to work on action plans.
Great. And that sounds perfect. How long did it take was it a day-long retreat for the strategic plan, or was it over a series of days?
We tried, we had hoped to do it in one day, 2 parts before and after lunch. It took longer, so we ended up coming back for a second day.
Great.
To finish up the action plans.
Okay. Who else has had experience with strategic planning, and what did it look like?
This is Michelle.
Okay.
And the Siskiyou Community Resource Collaborative had, when we became the collaborative, we had an all-day strategic planning session that was led by a consultant, Jill Phillips McLean, and she did a great job leading the board. So it was our board members. I think all 9 of them were able to be there, and we went away to the Lake Shastina Golf Resort and had a whole day of planning and strategically deciding what direction we wanted to go in for the next 3 years. And then we've done it again since then, probably last summer as well. And so that's nice because there's something magic about putting things down on paper like that. And when we were able to come back and look at what we had said we were going to do, that 2 years, I think it might have been only 2 years between the two, it had happened. And so that was really rewarding and gratifying, especially for board members, I think, because they aren't on the front lines. Seeing the accomplishments all the time, they have the harder job of piloting the ship behind the scenes, and so they very rarely get to see all the good stuff about meeting the goals and seeing people with the success stories and things like that. So it was really exciting for them to go back and look at the things they had said they would do and that they had gotten accomplished, and more. So
terrific. So that's great. Abby and Michelle, you guys get gold stars. Some of you, though, are feeling a little sheepish because your organizations haven't done strategic planning ever, or it's been a long time since you've done it. So because that kind of vision of future work is so important. In organizational development, there are kind of split thoughts on what the value of strategic planning is. Abby said they spent all this time and effort doing their strategic planning, and then the fires happened, which has completely changed where they're headed in the next few years. And that can be a real problem. Finding the time to get board members together to do a strategic plan just the thought of it can be so overwhelming. So one of the ways that organizational development consultants think about strategic planning now is, how do you make sure that it fits in to your organization's work every year? Because without that strategic thought, you really can't budget. So this budgeting piece is critical. Strategic planning is critical to the budget processing. So let's minimize what has to go into a strategic planning activity so that the board and staff or the staff or whatever configuration can make sure that they do it every year. So let's think a little bit more about a strategic plan. So the outputs, what do you actually get at the end of a strategic plan? Usually there's some step that is, what are our goals for the year? What is it that we're really trying to get done? Which of these rise to the top? Some kind of prioritization. And then most strategic plans stop right there, right? Now, Abby said they tried to start doing some action plans. That would be the work to develop the staffing plans and the funding plans, the operationalize what you're actually going to do. But most organizations don't spend the time to actually put those two things into their strategic planning efforts. When you think about it, if developing your staffing plans is kind of the majority of your expenses, and the funding plans are really the revenue that you're going to use to pay for that work, really what we're saying is that we need to do some budgeting around strategic planning. If we've got the ideas, then the next step is, well, how are we actually going to accomplish that? So the outputs of a strategic plan lead right into the need for budgeting. So that's one point. Now, here's kind of the traditional cycle of strategic planning. And I think this is a lot like what Abby outlined, that you mentioned was it the 3 W's, the goals? So they came up with, what are the most important things that we're going to try and accomplish either with existing work or new work in the future. And then they went to thinking about what's their vision that stems from their mission for what they're trying to accomplish. The strategies are, how are we going to attack these goals so that we can get them done? And then the measures and targets are kind of the evaluation of how do we know we succeeded. So that kind of cycle also is about going from the big picture, these are the goals we want to reach, into now how do we create a roadmap that we can actually follow so that it's not just an idea about a goal, but actual plans for doing it. So that's kind of the general strategic planning cycle, except there's one problem with this, and that is that it doesn't really talk about money at all, right? It's kind of a visioning, these are the things, these are the goals we want to get to. But because strategic planning and budgeting are so connected, there's kind of a new version of strategic planning that incorporates what's our bottom line. And this is just kind of an introduction to the strategic business planning models. it's actually where you have two bottom lines. What's the future work that we're going to do, and how does it impact both our mission and the profitability of our organization? Now, as soon as I say profitability, somebody's going to say, yeah, but we're nonprofits. We're not supposed to be making money, right? And that's true. But if the profitability line in the middle, if we say this is 0, and we're going to map all the things that we do in these quadrants, if you don't at least end up at 0, then that means that your nonprofit is losing money and you're in danger of not existing, right? So when we do strategic planning, it really does make sense to think about, and how are you going to sustain your business, your nonprofit, while you do that. So let me show you just a few details about what happens in a strategic business planning model. So they take those two quadrants, the two factors, and you end up with 4 quadrants. On the top right, you have your heart programs, and these are programs that your organization does that have high mission impact, but they're not very profitable. They're the labors of love type programs that you do because the community needs it, even though you can't quite figure out how to have that specific program do anything but lose money. Now, you may have a heart program, but what we want to do in this kind of model is map all the different things that you do, put them on this one system map, and then say, it's okay if you have programs that are losing money if they have high mission impact, because that's going to be balanced by something else that you do. It might be balanced by a star project, something with high mission impact and high profitability. So that would be helpful. The stop programs in the bottom left lower quadrant, those are your low mission impact and low profitability. Usually those programs are your administrative offices, or maybe it's keeping your buildings heated and warm so that your staff can work out of them, but they're actually not contributing to your mission. Stop doesn't mean that you need to stop that program. It just means that you need to think about it differently. And then the last quadrant is what we call our money trees. They're things that you do and in your organization, core activities that have a low mission impact, but they're highly profitable. That might be a fundraising gala that you have every year, or for a nonprofit, it might be a thrift store that you use the proceeds of to finance what you do. So in order to use this tool, what an organization does is they actually separate everything they do into cost centers. And for each cost center, you can measure the profitability using accounting. And then you also have a little bit more subjective, how much mission impact does each one of these things have? Now, the example I'm showing here is for a county fair. And so they decided they had 4 different cost centers: their annual fair, the fairground events that they had during the rest of the year, keeping the fairgrounds open so people can use it, and then they had a campground for RVs. And so let's look and see where those lie. They had 2 heart programs. The fairground events, these are ones that have high mission impact but low profitability, and their annual fair. Now, their annual fair has really high mission impact, and it's not so far from breaking even. Their campground, on the other hand, the campground really didn't contribute much to the mission of the organization, but they were making quite a nice chunk of change from running the campgrounds. And then this red cost center were keeping the buildings open during the week so that the people with horses could come ride in the indoor arena, and so the 4-H kids could use the facility. So now they have a baseline of where all their programs fall. The strategic planning part then is taking each of these cost centers and thinking how you could change either the profitability or the mission impact. So this group, I actually was a consultant on this project, and I took them through what choices they could make to have their situation change. So we started with the RV campground, and we said, yeah, that's doing rather well. How can we take the model for the campground and make it have more of a mission impact? The size of the circle is the amount of the budget that it includes. So we'd love to do more of the campgrounds. So what we decided for this county group is, we've got a campground at the fairgrounds. Let's invest some money and put campgrounds in other parts of the county and talk about the products that are grown and sold in those other parts of the county as kind of a system of campgrounds, and have the revenue go back to support the fairgrounds. So that was kind of a clever idea that came out of that planning. That would, the overall bottom line would increase for all of our other programs that aren't making money. This could help subsidize the cost of those. Another example in that project was, we looked at just keeping the fairgrounds open, and we decided we're really hemorrhaging money by doing that. We want to have the fairgrounds be available for the 4-H kids and the horse riders, but we can't afford to have the fairgrounds open 7 days a week, all day long for those purposes. So if we limited the hours and decreased the free use of the fairgrounds, then we could at least stop hemorrhaging money, and that over time that would improve our bottom line. So what do you think about that? It's a different way of strategic planning that really helps you consider, how do we have all of our cost centers, how are they interconnected, and how can we make some changes that are going to result in helping the organization meet profitability. This model is actually, there's a book that outlines it, and it's one of the books that's available on the select book list that the Ford Family Foundation puts out. It's called Making Strategic Decisions for Financial Viability, and it's one that I highly recommend. Okay. Now, when you think about profitability and strategic planning, kind of who your organization is, there's another piece that a lot of organizations are using, and that is, you don't have to be exclusively what we consider a traditional nonprofit. That there's really a spectrum of ways that organizations look at their business plan or their ability to generate funds. So social enterprises are a new idea, and those are entities that are run by a nonprofit, but they have enough of a business plan that they are actually working they're doing charitable activities, but they're generating significant income by doing so, right? So the organization that I work for, NeighborWorks Umpqua, we're a traditional nonprofit, but we have a subsidiary that's a social enterprise. Our social enterprise is a used building supply store, like a Habitat for Humanity store, but our social enterprise hires reentry folks coming out of prison. It gives them a job opportunity, workforce skills, so that they can then transition out of that and go find other work. So that social enterprise generates about $600,000 a year. And it makes a profit. So we can use that to help subsidize some of our programs that aren't making any money. So that's a social enterprise. It sits between the traditional nonprofit and the fact that a lot of nonprofits are looking for other ways to generate income. Your museums are going towards, Ernie, do you have a gift store at the museum? Does it bring in any income?
Yes, if we didn't have the gift shop, we wouldn't exist.
Okay. So that's the case for a lot of museums. So how do we think about ways that these kind of side activities, whether they're mission related or not, can really help sustain the mission that we want to do? Does anybody else have an example of a social enterprise? Do any of your organizations have a social enterprise? Ernie, I think yours is more of the your museum has income generating activities. Your
Yes.
gift shop is still part of the nonprofit, right?
Correct. And it the artful gifts, or whatever, however you want to put it, that are in the museum are from the same group of artists that we have our art shows. And so there might be an art show and the originals are on the walls, but in the gift shop, we might have prints or postcards or something else related by the same artist. So we try to tie the two together.
Great. Yes?
Well, with Leave and No Trace, what we hope to do is create a nonprofit generating activity that will also become a social enterprise to support our educational outreach.
And what is it going to be?
The trash to tiles that we were talking about last week.
Right.
Yeah.
Great. And so the social enterprise, a lot of them spin off and become their own nonprofits. But then they may have some financial link with the original nonprofit that mean that both nonprofits benefit. Great. Okay, let's continue down the spectrum. A socially responsible business. Now it's got a profit-making motive. The shareholders are there to advise on the profit. And the profit is actually not going to stay with the nonprofit. It's going to get redistributed to the shareholders. Who can think of a socially responsible business?
We have Bi-Mart up here. Is that, or is that just that they're all shareholders?
I think Bi-Mart might fall into a corporation practicing social responsibility. They give a lot of money back into the community. They are their own shareholders. A socially responsible business, this category, I think of Paul Newman, who gives all of his profits to charity. or that's what you hear. Or Patagonia, that puts a lot of money into third world countries. And then we have
Considered?
what?
Is Goodwill considered a social enterprise?
Ooh, that's a good question. So Goodwill's a nonprofit, right? And the fact that they have a workforce development arm, I think would make it a social enterprise. So the purpose of this slide is just to get everybody to think, while we're strategic planning, it's not against the law to make a profit as a nonprofit, right? You have to have become a nonprofit by identifying the charitable activities that you're doing. But then you really we're being pushed more and more to think about ways that we can generate income, even if the nonprofit has to pay taxes on those extra incomes to keep us in a good financial position. So that is part of what can we do to not be quite so dependent on grants. Okay. So going back to this idea of strategic planning can be a long process. How do we incorporate something short of a whole full strategic plan into the budget process? And so this is what this might look like. In your budgeting process, each year, right as it's getting done, there can be a 2 or 3 hour budget directive planning session where you really work out what are the new goals for the organization for this year. By spending that 3 hours, and once you implement an activity like this, the first year it's going to be messy and people are going to be confused. But once organizations adopt this, then people get used to it and they actually get excited about what's going to happen out of the directive planning meeting. So for some of your organizations, it makes a lot of sense for the boards to be directing what are the new things that we want to have happen. For others of you, it'll be a combination of board members and staff members. And there may be other organizations where the staff generate the goals and then the board approves them. As long as the board is part of the decision-making on how the resources are going to be gathered and spent, then you're doing good work. And so after that happens, then the work of who develops the staffing plans and funding plans can be worked out. But that new ideas and what do we really want to accomplish this year is something that I think has to happen annually. Because otherwise, where do you go with your budget? Otherwise, it just becomes, well, we'll just add 5% onto a bunch of categories. So if we base it in what we actually think we want to do, then the budgets become more dynamic and it becomes work that funders want to fund, right? Okay, so our organizational budgets then are resource plans for work to be done. And these resources that we're talking about have to show 3 things. We have to show that we have enough capacity to do the work, that we have the capacity to sustain the work, and that we know the sources of financial support that we're going to have. Now, it's not obvious how you're going to show these three elements in your budgets. But that's what I'm hoping to show you in the different forms of budgets that we're going to use. So these resource plans, if we get good at using different kinds of budget templates to show different things, we really are going to be able to have the story of what we propose to do come alive in these budgets.
So I have a question.
Yeah.
Does this include just like all budgets for all grants? Like, is there a time when you wouldn't need to show your own financial sustainability? I mean, if you're just trying to, I don't know, keep your building open or something like that. I mean, I don't know.
No, that's a great question, Hollis. So if all you had was, here's our operating plan, here's what we do, and we just need to keep it going, that's fine if that by yourself will help you accomplish your mission and you already know how you are going to pay for it. As soon as you start thinking about writing grants, the funders aren't interested in paying for just keeping things going that already exist. They want to be the spark or the catalyst for new things. So if we're going to attract grant funding, we're going to have to keep adding those new ideas, the new ways that we're going to accomplish our missions to our budgets. Right?
Like showing an evolution, like the business staying the same or the nonprofit staying the same doesn't have the same draw as showing growth or change.
The nonprofit staying the same has almost no draw for the funders who want to help you evolve and grow and try new things. Now, that's too bad, right? Because there are a lot of nonprofits doing great existing work, and I just want them to keep going, right? But the funders, they're interested in having you accomplish their mission, right? And their mission is going to be future thinking and new and innovative work too. So just making sure that you're still out there and around by funding existing work isn't helping them create a dynamic future picture. Okay.
So, well, I mean, does that work also if it's just like there is a certain time project for, there's a time limit for this project? Do you need to show that you're planning to keep this project going past the grant in order to get the grant for like most of the time?
Yeah, that's just what that question about sustainability, how are you going to keep your project going without grant funds after the grant goes away? And that's why you have to build in a new plan to create additional revenue, or that once your project's done, it won't cost any more money. It was a one-time project that has an end. So you do have to come up with a plan for how to keep the project going. We'll get back to talking about that in just a minute.
You could also state that the project is going to end and that's part of the original plan, and that also works.
Yep. Yep. So when you build a building, the capital projects go away, right, after the building's built, but then you're going to have new costs to keep whatever's going to happen in the building going. So for a capital project, you can say, yeah, the building won't have any more costs or negligible ones, but here's my plan for the next 3 years of the programming that we're going to have in the building and how we're going to sustain that work. Okay, so you can think of two different kinds of budgets. The organizational budget is everything that your organization plans to do in a period of time. And every organization that has a grant program needs to have an organizational budget. In addition, the funders are going to want to know what your project budget is. And that's the thing that you're asking the funding for. So an organizational budget for Leave and No Trace might include the cleanup activities and their new Trash to Tiles project, some marketing money, some insurance and stuff. But the grant project might just be the Tiles to Trash initiative. So she's going to have one organizational budget and a project budget, and the funders are going to want her to submit both. So we're going to focus on a little bit on both, organizational and project budgets. Now, think about the organizational budget as a story. So once upon a time, we have this plan for our organization, the work that we're going to be done. And at the end, we're going to feel really good about everything that we accomplished, right? So we create that every year, the board approves it, and we go on our merry way. Now, does the story end up happening just like we thought it was going to? No. Especially not as a grant writer, right? Because at the beginning of the year, we have a budget that's this size. And then January 15th, right after the start of the year, we get another board or staff member. They have this great new project that they want us to just jump in and do. So we submit 3 more grants, and now the size of the work to be done suddenly is much larger. But we actually didn't get those grants, we just submitted them. So one of them gets denied, and that changes the size of the work to be done. We get a couple, and that changes. And so all throughout the year, in terms of a grant writing lens, the budget keeps changing. So is one board approved annual budget really a good resource picture of what we're going to be doing? No, right? It really depends where you are during the year about what you actually think is going to happen. So that makes budgeting for organizations that have a lot of grants or depend on grants to be much more fluid. And we can have that board approved document, but we're going to need some internal operating tools that really help us change the way we see the resources that are going to be coming in and going. So we need some working tools for budgets. And that's what we're going to do. So let's take a look at some the idea of sustainability, or how do we keep these programs going. And I'm going to show the first few slides are the ones that I showed last time, and then we're going to go into more depth. So this table shows the different categories of things that an organization does. An organization has new programs, what they're thinking about or planning. They've got what they're already doing. They've got administrative costs, and then they have fundraising costs. Now, I like to divide them this way because these two on the left, those have their own section in the 990 tax returns. So you actually have to report on those activities separately. Then we have the programming that we're doing. Now, when you think of what does a funder want to fund, what is a foundation, how do they want to invest in us? They really want to invest in the new programs because the programs are what are helping us accomplish our mission, right? So they want to get in on the mission work. They're not so happy about that existing program because there's nothing new that's going to happen from that. And because the admin and the fundraising don't directly help you accomplish their mission, they're even less excited about those. So that's just our reality. That's what we have to work with. So when we develop the funding plans, the ways that we're going to make money and allocate it to our different programs, we do that by what are the different opportunities that we have for revenue and how flexible are those sources of funding. In other words, if I raise money at an event, am I allowed to spend those funds on anything I want to, or is it going to be restricted for the things that I advertised at that event? And so some things like unrestricted grants or operating grants, you can spend on whatever you want. Other things like sponsorships usually are designated for a program, and so it has to be spent that way. And so we put those together and we get this table that shows that as we develop a funding plan, the way that we look at our programs has to change over time. So our new programs, those are the ones we can actively write grants for and get. And this was Hollis's point. So can we just pay, can we write a grant for the things that we just need to do? And the answer is, sometimes you can get lucky and get funding for those, but that's not what the funders are really interested in doing. So we have to develop these other funding streams as a way to pay for our existing programs. Okay, any questions?
So, can I ask one more question about that one?
Yeah.
So in order to keep an existing program going, would it be like you want to add some new stuff to that existing program, or would you have to like, I mean, how do you manage that?
Yeah, so I call it, you can refresh an existing program and then you can shop it back around to the grants again. So refresh might be serving a different population, or bringing in new partners to do the work differently, or using new digital tools so that you can do it remotely. So there are ways you can refresh it, and then you're really going to sell the project to the funder by talking about how those new things are going to help save time and money, or going to allow you to expand your audience. Yeah?
I have a question about when it says contracts, you've only got them in existing programs, new programs. What do you mean by contracts?
A contract might mean we'd like to pay Leaving No Trace to come do a cleanup at our state park every month.
Okay.
And we're going to pay you to do that work.
Okay. And that could be used to support the existing programs.
Yes. So even though
also,
that's a new contract with new work, you can use some of the profit, the excess profit from that, to pay for something that doesn't make any money and you're struggling to keep going.
I see. Okay, thank you.
But it really helps to have it split out by programs and not just a single 2-column budget, so that you can distinguish between how you're going to fund each thing. So not just existing program, but for each program that we have, we're going to have to develop a funding plan for it. So that's what we're actually going to look at now. Okay. So this is the concept, and now I'm going to put it into practice. So here's a new program that we're going to start. And we're going to think about what are the resources that we need to start a new program. Well, what Ford told us is you can come to us and we'll give you 1/3 of whatever you need, but no more. Okay. So we've got a program. We're going to ask the Ford Family Foundation to give us startup funds for it. That means that we're going to have to find the resources either in kind or cash through our organization for some portion of the new program. And maybe we'll have a fee for service. And so we'll ask the community to support a third of it, right? Now, this is just a sample. There may be some programs like the USDA food program that pays for almost all of the program out of grant funds, and we'll keep doing that. But when I think about a new program, I think about maybe a third to a half of it in grants the first time, and then I'll have to figure out the other revenue for it. But let's say we're starting with this number. Now, as that program ages, so it's no longer a little baby, but it's a teenager program with attitude, we're gonna have to decrease our reliance on grants. So we're no longer gonna get a third of grants, maybe a 15% will come in grants, program grants. But now we're gonna go after some operating grants that will pay to sustain it, if we can find them. That means the organization is still going to have to come up with their own investment, either through fundraising or something that they do, in-kind services to keep this program going. And we're shifting the reliance to keep this program going on the community. The community has to need this program, they have to want it, and they have to show up for it to continue to be valid. So if the community support doesn't grow, then it's basically saying that program isn't meeting its sustainability goals. So you have to question whether it's really a needed program anymore. Okay, so that's part of thinking about aging programs. And then the final one is, well, what happens when a program continues to go on and on? How is it funded then? Well, we're not going to expect any program grants. We're still using operating or unrestricted grants as a way that we can keep it going. By this time, we can't afford to put any more organizational investment in that, none of our fundraising dollars or events, because we're focused on starting another new initiative. And so that means that 80% of that program is coming through indirect or direct community support. That might be businesses and sponsorships, it might be contracts, but it's the community saying, yes, we think this program effort is valid and we're willing to pay for it, right? So that's what it looks like, the shift in how that work gets funded. Now I'm going to go one step further, and I've embedded the worksheets in the PowerPoint so you can see what it actually looks like for an organization. So this is all part of budgeting. The funding plan is the revenue stream for these organizations. Can you guys see can you read these well enough? Lydia, you're nodding yes?
Yes.
Okay, great. So this is the Waterville's Kids Club. They have an existing after-school program, and they just started a summer camp. These are the different ways that they are making the money for the organization. They're bringing in $200,000 a year. And this is the percentage you can measure of the different kinds of income that they're getting to make that work. And here you can see we actually have 3 different kinds of grants. Program grants that are funding the programs directly, capacity building grants to do something new or to learn something either as a program or for the organization, and then operating grants. Well, that's great. But using this kind of budgeting, I can't tell what's going to the after school program and what's going to the summer camp program, right? So that's really not helping me that much. So we need a different form of budgeting that is by program area. And so that's what this is showing. So now we can actually see what's happening. So how are we funding our after school program? It's an existing program. So would we expect program grants? Nope. It's already used the program grants to get it started. It's not getting any capacity building grants. It's getting some operating grants. So that's good. So this after school program is only happening because of earned income. We're charging money for it, and we're doing some fundraising to keep it going. Okay, that seems like a valid plan for an existing program. Now our summer program that's new, that's where we're going to be able to bring in the grants, right? So we're asking for 50,000 in program grants and some startup capacity building funds. Now that's a lot of money for a summer camp, bringing in grants. So it must be some important need. Maybe it's in a community with a lot of youth who don't know what to do with themselves. They really need help. So that's great. So now we can really see how we're funding each of our programs. So then at the bottom, it says, during a recent strategic planning process, the board chooses to start a USDA food program at the Kids Club. So for the next year, now they've got a new idea. How is this going to affect their strategic funding plan for the next year's budget? And how about the year after that? Okay, so now we've got a new program that's going to age an existing program, and we're going to start another one. So let's see what happens. Okay, brand new food program, how are we going to fund it? Grants, right? And in this case, like I said, it's a food program. They're going to pay for the whole thing in grants, right? We don't have to use any of our fundraising for it. And that's a good thing because our summer camp is no longer brand new. It's not going to get as much grant funding. It's still going to get some. So we're going to have to spend more of our fundraising dollars keeping this summer camp going. And whereas we didn't have to charge rent for the summer camp before, now we're going to have to start doing that. What's happening with our after school program? Not much. It's staying about the same, right? And that makes sense because we haven't made any modifications or refreshed our program. So the new program grants mean that the actual amount of grants that we're bringing in for the organization are about the same as last year. They're just going for different things. Okay? So that's this year. And now let's look at the next year. So in the next year, the food program is not bringing in as many grants as it used to be. So we're having to do some more fundraising and we're getting some earned income. This might not be kids paying for food. We may ask the school district to help subsidize this program, or we may ask for some corporate sponsors. Okay, so we're having to put some additional resources to keep this going. Our summer camp, the amount of grants it's getting is even less now. We've worked really hard to find a new source of grant income through operating grants to keep that going. And then our after school program, still it's staying just about the same. Now, when I look over here, I see that our grant income has gone down this year, right? So what that tells me as a grant writer is that we better start thinking about another program, or how are we going to change the after-school program or summer camp to refresh them so that they'll really be ready for grant revenue again. So what you see is this cycle where the organizations have to keep developing new program areas to keep attracting grant funding.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Can I get an example of what an operating grant would look like?
Yes. So an operating grant, the Ford Family Foundation actually has operating grants, and it means that you would get $40,000, let's say, in your admin, and you can spend that money on whatever you want, right? So it's the funders saying, we believe Marble Mountain Farm can do a really good job of managing its finances. So we're going to give you an investment, and you can decide where to spend it. We trust you. So when organizations develop long-standing relationships with funders, they've gotten several grants, they've done the work they said they were going to do in the grants, then the funders start coming to you and asking you, what would you like money for now, right? So they really, they get beyond just the written grant proposals that they fund, and they really can kind of help you think strategically about where their next investment will best go. But you have to create that trust and belief with funders, which is why it's so hard for startup organizations, because they don't have that relationship yet with funders. It happens over time.
So that's why it's good to have several programs prepared so that you can start building that relationship, so that and have plans to even refresh old programs if that's the main theme of what you're trying to do, so that you can prove yourself.
Yep. And so that you have something new to come back to the funders with. Because if you come back to them with the same program, then you kind of get stale to them, right?
And if they don't feel like you're fulfilling the mission that you actually started out for.
Well, that existing program may be great. And in some cases, there are funders that keep funding existing programs because they just love them and they love what a great job you do with them, right? But it's going to take a while to find out who those foundations are and the ones that you really click with. You're doing an important part of their mission, so they will keep funding you. That's rare. So meanwhile, you need these great ideas that you keep having it as an organization, different ways that you can accomplish your mission so that they're grant eligible.
The thing that scares me about this, though, is that you can get to the point where kind of the tail is wagging the head. You're looking for grants so you can get more money, but your programs are determined by what the possibilities are rather than maybe what your needs are. And
you're exactly right, Ernie. And it's just really hard. You're talking about mission drift too, right? Because the opportunities don't necessarily line up with your organization. And that's why the relationships with the funders are so important, because at some point they'll understand who you are and what you're trying to do, and they really want to support your mission as well. So you can really negotiate for what your needs are, what you can't find the fundings to cover. And eventually when you build that trust, they will take part of that and try and fund it. Like the Ford Family Foundation. If you have a program that's children and youth focused, they will give you an operating grant that will fund the administration and the staff that allow you to do that work.
The other thing that I think about too is, it's not here, but it's kind of a unwritten thing, is at some point, one of your programs may longer not have any more community or grant support. And then you just have to decide, when do you pull the plug on that program and put something new in?
And that is so hard for a lot of organizations to do. But think about what an albatross it is to have a program that people aren't attending anymore. There's not community support for it. And if you keep doing it, it's going to drag your organization down. Right?
Right.
So having the confidence to get rid of a program that is no longer relevant is a really difficult but powerful thing. And that makes room for the staff capacity to come in and do new work. Okay. So that's the idea of a funding plan that helps you get to sustainability. Let's move on. Next thing I want to talk about are budgets that use in-kind contributions, either for match or as a way to better demonstrate your resources. So if you're a small organization that's all volunteer run, is Leaving No Trace all volunteer, Lydia? Okay. Then the resources to do your work includes a lot of volunteer labor, right? So how do you budget for that? And if you don't share that in kind, then are you really doing a good job of sharing what the resources are that you need to do your work?
We keep logs of hours.
Awesome. Okay. So here's a budget for a small organization. This one's a food bank. And they bring in very little revenue and they don't spend a lot in cash. But that's because they're all volunteer led. Now, let me ask, is it okay to have a budget that doesn't balance, that's not exactly zero? Is that all right? It actually is, unless your bylaws say that you have to have a balanced budget. Sometimes there are reasons why you may have leftover cash from the last year. So maybe it's okay if you plan to spend more than you're going to bring in this year. So that's okay. So they're planning to spend a little more than they're making this year. But in fact, if you actually represented the value of their in-kind labor, the resources that it takes to actually make this organization function, it's a really different picture than if you aren't showing those in-kind costs, right? So since budgets, I'm saying, are resource pictures, we really want to model what it takes to get this work done. Now, as soon as you add in-kind in your budgets, the way that you represent the in-kind value changes. Because over here, where I said it doesn't matter if you have an excess or less than zero in your cash. For in-kind, because it's not real money, you have to represent the in-kind in both the revenue and the expenses so that they exactly equal out and you end up with nothing. Okay, so we'll see that in just a minute. So let's look at a real example. Here's a basic budget. It's the Water Valley Community Food Bank. They're bringing in about 28,000 and they're spending about the same amount. They're going to have a surplus. How are they making their money? Can you see?
Grants,
Getting
fund,
some state funds, grants.
Individual donors.
Yeah. So they've got a nice program and they're spending it on food, equipment, and then office supplies. They're doing a little fundraising. But this really isn't a good resource picture. So let's add in the in-kind for the organization. Now, when we add in kind, again, we're adding what are the things that got donated in revenue, and then how are those exact things being spent in expenses so that we end up with a net zero. So what's getting donated?
food, volunteer labor, equipment, supply.
Yes, great. And so we had to add some more rows to put that in. But then the neat thing is we've got all these hours, 1,080 hours in volunteers. What are those volunteers doing?
Various tasks throughout the organization.
Yeah, their program coordination and data tracking, food bank staffing, they're doing fundraising, coordination, facility maintenance. So all of a sudden we actually can show what is the work that the organization's doing? What capacity do they have to do this work, right? Because we didn't have any of these rows. We had facility maintenance, but that was it. So now we're adding a lot more information about how this group accomplishes their work. It's a much better resource picture, right? And when you include this information, it also allows you to value this when you're asking for money from the funders. So the Ford Family Foundation is fabulously welcoming to in-kind donations and in-kind labor when they ask for match. So they said they would fund 1/3 of any project. And if you were asking them for operating support in the cash budget, you only had 28,000, so you could only ask for 9,300. But if you've got this $49,000 budget, now you can ask for 16,000, right? So that allows you to ask for a lot more money for organizations that agree to use in-kind as match. So how do you figure out the value of in-kind contributions? There's a great tutorial put out by the National Service, the AmeriCorps group. It's called the National Service Knowledge Network, and it goes through how do you value in kind, how do you document it, and how do you record it for tax purposes. I highly recommend that. The Ford Family Foundation, most funders have guidance on how they want in-kind treated for their grants. And if you don't get an answer on how they want you to record in-kind, that's a great question to ask program officers as you're putting your budget together for them. So when you think of the labor for general in-kind, it actually can go several different ways. You can actually look up the volunteer time through the independent sector, and they will actually give you an amount per state of what a volunteer's wage can be measured at. That's great if a funder will allow you to use that, and the Ford Family Foundation does. Other funders, like Travel Oregon in Oregon, they want you to use minimum wage. And I can see where that makes sense too, because if you live in a community, especially a community with a high level of poverty, then you actually don't want to value your volunteers higher than your staff's wages, right? But the best thing to do is to start with, what do their grant guidelines say about how they want volunteer labor treated? Now, when I think of volunteer labor, I think of general tasks and board participation. But there's a whole nother portion of in-kind labor called professional in-kind labor. And that's where somebody is contributing a service that they use in their professional life. So for example, if I'm a grant writer and I offer to write grants for your organization for free, then instead of using the minimum wage or what the independent sector says, you can use the amount that I charge other people for those services. Now, when you start budgeting using in-kind labor and especially professional in-kind, what I notice is some foundations, they start raising their eyebrows when they see professional rates of labor that are high. So for project management folks, if you put numbers down that are higher than about $50 an hour, you start raising eyebrows. I mean, you may be very accurately reporting the salary and benefits amount, but there's a bias against high amounts, I've noticed. Any questions about that? Lydia, you said you tracked volunteer in kind. How do you do that?
We do it by, well, two methods actually. If we have what we call a walk, which is usually a walk for awareness, we're doing one right now from Florence to Eugene on 126. We track how many, what days are worked, who's doing them for how many hours, how many miles the support vehicle is driven. We keep extreme track of mileage because we have to use a support vehicle for going and getting more supplies because we hand out a lot of information. And at the same time, we have to keep track of donations. We often get donations for materials like the bags that we're using and that sort of thing that are just dropped off at the site. So there's a lot of ongoing paperwork constantly.
Okay, Kathy pointed out break. I know Megan's going to join us for her presentation at 4:15, and I've got a little bit more material. So can you guys hold on for another 10 minutes and we'll take a quick break before Megan goes. Okay.
I was going to add, just at the museum, we just have a clipboard and you sign in when you're volunteering, number of hours, and then a description of what you do.
Terrific. There are some nifty software programs that allow you to send volunteer hours out for everybody. If you're doing a lot of volunteer tracking, I found those work well because a lot of people have their volunteer hours tracked on their computer. Okay. All right. So the second thing I'm going to do is show you a more advanced strategy for how do you fund your operating expenses. And it goes like this. We're going to start with a budget that's split out by program, just like we did before. So we've got our new programs, our existing programs, and then I put admin and fundraising together. So these administrative costs, we often find that they're really hard to get funded because you can't get grants for them. And in organizations that receive a lot of grants, that's a real challenge. How do you have enough administrative cost enough administrative time? How can you warrant it to actually get your programs done? So, but if you didn't have this administrative cost, how would you ever get your work done? Abby, could your organization exist without your administrative functions?
No.
No, no, they're critical to what we do. So budgets are our models of how we are spending our resources, right? So because we get to pick how we present the information, I'm going to say that these administrative functions are really critical to the existence of these programs. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this administrative column and I am actually going to assign a portion of it to each of my programs. And then what I'm going to do is help my board members and my staff understand that the new program whose direct costs started out as $45,000, we're not going to think of that program as a $45,000 program. We're going to think of it as a loaded program that's actually $82,000. And so when we fundraise for the new program, and we're going to write a bunch of grants for it, we're going to include those administrative costs. When we fundraise for these other programs, we're going to include the administrative costs. So that when we get done fundraising for our programs, we're all done because our administrative costs are paid for.
I have a question.
Yeah.
How would you do that when you have like rental income that's unrelated to your other programs? Do you keep that separate?
You might think that's not something that, or what you might do is you might assign a different percentage to the rental incomes of your administrative costs, right? So you could think of these new programs, the ones that you can get the grants for, as, hey, maybe we should assign them a higher percent of our administrative costs because we're going to get grants for those. And maybe the grant funders will understand we need more administrative costs to get that program going, right? Now, that's great. This is actually how organizations fund their administrative costs. We do it as a percentage of our grant requests. Some funders, I can think of one in Oregon, they won't fund any administrative costs. So if that's the case, and I choose them to go to for a new program, that means I've got to figure out a way to fund the whole $110,000 with something else. And I don't want to put that administrative burden on my existing programs because they're already hard enough to find grants for. So that means if there's a funder that's not going to fund administrative fees, I'm going to think really hard about going to that funder, especially for a new program. Maybe I'll save that funder for a refreshed existing program, right? So understanding how much of the administrative burden organizations, funders are willing to accept is actually a really important part of budgeting, because that's the way you actually get your admin costs funded. You should always, if a funder says you are allowed to apply for up to 10% of admin funds, then I would always ask for them.
So they'll usually like lay that out in the description of their grant, what they will and will not
They'll
consider as-
usually
okay.
say, if they have a limit on how much admin funds they'll fund, they'll say it. Now, larger organizations like mine that get federal grants, we actually have an indirect cost determination that we do federally that says what are our true administrative costs. And so for our organization, it's 20.3%. So when we get a federal grant, on top of what we need for our programs, we get that extra 20%. Excuse me. Okay, kind of cool. Your organization might not be there yet, but this is actually the sophistication in budget that you want to work towards. And I'm going to skip over multi-year budgets, because what I want to do before I let you out on a little break is just to let you know about your homework. So Kathy, along with the PowerPoint, sent you 2 forms of project budgets. And so I want you to create a budget for the project that you're working on. One of the forms is an Excel form, and it has equations in it. If you know how to use Excel, you're welcome to use that form. I suggest that you save a copy just to save, and then play around in the copy, because the equations might get scrambled, just might. And then there's another budget form that's in Word. So you'll have to do the math yourself, but it's another format that you can use for simple budgets. Those will be fun to play around with. And again, I'm happy to look at either one. In both cases, I used in-kind donations. So it's set up to do both cash and in-kind. So for your own funding plan, you'll start again by asking, how much is the total project going to cost? And then how much in funding do I think I can get from grants? And what are the ways that I'm going to raise the other funding in cash and in kind? You're also going to think about, in my resource plan, how do I show that we're a collaborative organization? What other partners can I bring in and show in my budget as cash, or more likely as in kind? Okay. And then in some cases, there are funders who are very happy to see in kind. There are others that give you a template and it doesn't include in kind. And I think even if you can't include in kind in a budget, there's a great place to show in kind is when they talk about capacity to do work, or who your project partners are. So you can share what they're going to bring.
Tell me what an example of, I'm sorry.
No, great. Go ahead, Paul. What was your question?
Could you tell me what an example of capacity to get work done would, like, just one example?
Okay, so when I showed that food bank budget, there was no staff, right? Because everybody was a volunteer. But when I added in the in-kind, I had to add in all these rows that showed what the volunteers were doing. the facility maintenance, the fundraising coordination, the food bank staffing, and that shows capacity to get the work done. That you're actually including in your resource picture, here's all the stuff that we're doing. And we've got somebody who can do that work. Right? The first picture just shows the cash commodities that are getting exchanged. The budget with the in-kind shows how does this actually operate. The fact that I actually had a fundraising piece tells me, hey, this organization is working at getting in-kind donations. They're doing some fundraising work. They probably have an event, right? So I would have really different feelings about that organization and their work they're doing just by looking at those two budgets. Does that make sense? So each of you are in different places with your organizations around budgeting. I hope what I brought out is that there are different levels of sophistication, and we're kind of all on the learning curve of that for our organizations. So besides working on your project budget, introducing in-kind tracking for your organization might be a nice capacity building step for you. For some of you, developing a funding plan that goes out not just for the next year, but for multiple years, like I showed, might be a really nice technical assistance project that you do. I think I'm gonna go ahead and stop there, and I'm gonna stop my share because I bet Megan has joined us. Are you there, Megan?
I'm here.
Okay, great. And I'm going to give everybody a 2-minute stretch break. So we'll start again at about 4:16, and we'll get your, I'll hand you hosting privileges.
Perfect.
So everybody back in a couple minutes. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. This is great because then folks get to stretch and I get to pull up my PowerPoint without people watching me going, "Durr, where's my PowerPoint?"
Okay, I'm going to make you a co-host. I can do that. There you go.
Okay. Ta-da. Can you see it, Meredith?
Yeah, it looks great.
Awesome. Feeling like a winner. Now we just need our internet to hold out.
Yeah, well, you know, I had my fingers crossed here too.
Oh my gosh. These days with the world as it is, like I just don't trust anything. So I even like printed a copy and then have the dial-in number. So I'm like, if all else fails, I phone in and just read my notes.
Megan, this is the third session, and I just gave out the budget homework. After the first session, everybody created a project description for the project they're working on. And then after the second session, they created a needs statement and some draft outcomes. And they used those to create a visual, a one-pager of what they're going to do. So nice. They're collecting tools.
That is so great. I wish I had taken a class like this when I started out in grant writing years ago. It would have been so helpful. Just thrown to the wolves.
Well, I did take a really great grant writing class, and it's really helpful. I think it's helpful just to be in a room of people that are all trying to do the same thing. Okay, Megan, take it away.
All right. Well, hello, everyone. I know this is the end of the day, so I get tired at this time of day, so I'm going to try and compensate by being ridiculously animated, and we'll see how it goes. But I'm Megan. I am the program officer for Community Foundation of the North State, previously known as Shasta Regional Community Foundation. And I am the program officer, and so I am the contact here for all things grants. And here's my photo. I'm wearing the same shirt. This is embarrassing. But Amanda, my coworker, I bet many of you know her. She's been here many years. And I wanted to assure you that she is still here at the Community Foundation. She's just in a new role. So she's our Director of Community Impact. That means she's your contact for all things North State Giving Tuesday, for disaster relief, and for other special projects. So Amanda is still here, but for all things grants, you get me. And I've been here for, well, since March. I started the day that the quarantine went into effect. So I started working remotely, and it's just a joy to be here. I'm from Paradise originally, so I'm from the North State. And have been in Reading since 2005, went to Chico State, if there's any Chico State alums in the house. And I've spent the past 15 years or so working for different nonprofits in fundraising. So different areas of development, arts and cultural institutions, environmental, animal welfare, so a number of different groups. So I'm a fundraiser myself. I've done grant writing and continue to do this for the Community Foundation. All right, so we have just a little bit of time together today. So I wanted to share just kind of an overview of the Community Foundation of the North State, what we do, and then focus on grant opportunities. That's why you're all here, right? You're writing grants, wanting to bring in the money. So I wanted to share what is specifically available in Siskiyou County, and then kind of open the curtain so you can see what we do behind the scenes and how we grant out funding. All right, so who are we here at the Community Foundation? Well, like many of you, we are also a nonprofit. We're a public charity, and we primarily serve Shasta, Siskiyou, and Tehama counties. And our goal is to impact the region through the power of giving. I have a little asterisk here because sometimes we also do fund in Trinity and Modoc counties. If you know of any colleagues or friend organizations in Modoc or Trinity, know that for some of our funds, we do work there too. And when I started at the Community Foundation, I was kind of like, okay, what do we do? I got to wrap my brain around this. And the easiest way I think to think about it is that we're like a charitable bank. And so we accept donations, we pool them, invest them, and then make grants. And so kind of our slogan is give, grow, grant. People are generous organizations. They give us funds. We grow them by investing them, and then we make grants out into the community. And we are celebrating this year 20 years of impact. So it just seems like yesterday was the year 2000, but here we are. And the Community Foundation started with some seed funds, around $300,000. And here comes that grow part. So we've grown, and now we have over $34 million in assets and 150 different funds. I think it's important to note, because when I hear this, I'm like, wow, that's so much money. And it is, which is incredible. But a lot of it is tied up in restricted ways. So for instance, when we say we have over 150 funds, some of those are scholarship funds. And maybe those scholarships are only available to students studying agriculture in Tehama County and things like that. So each year, we are giving out about $3 to $4 million in grants, which is still a great chunk of change. All right, so we do more also than just issuing out grants. And so I just wanted to really briefly share some of the other things that we can do for your organization, services that we provide. So in addition to grant opportunities, we also do some nonprofit matchmaking with local donors. So we often have people call us who are in different scenarios where they want to give, and we can connect them to your organization. So it's really great to know you and who you are and what your org is doing. I always get the Fiddler on the Roof song stuck in my head when I say this. So if that's happened, I'm sorry to any of you, the Matchmaker song. We can also work with your donors to determine best giving if there's some kind of a tricky gift. So maybe there's a large stock gift or some other kind of asset. And we can actually work with them for your organization and help facilitate that gift in a more easy way. Also, we can help your organization set up, and then we manage organizational endowment funds. And that's basically just a big fancy word for if your organization, let's say someone maybe passed away and they left a big gift to your organization, you might want to invest that. And then every year, a portion of that money, whatever is raised on the investment, can come back to your organization. So there's many orgs that do that here in the North State. And we can also liquidate property. If someone gives you a gift of land and you're like, what do we do with this land? You can call us here at the Community Foundation. We can help you with that. And then of course, hosting North State Giving Tuesday.
Megan,
Mhm.
this is Meredith. Back to your matchmaker. How do organizations help you learn about them? Is there
Oh, that's such a great question. Yay. Well, in non-COVID times, you know, I would hope that over time, we do field trip quite a bit as staff. There would be nothing I would love more than to have you call me and say, hey, next time you're up in Siskiyou County, let's go have coffee. But that's not super on the docket right now. So what is easiest right now in COVID times is at your leisure to just send me a quick email. I'll give out all that information at the end with maybe directing me to your website. And then let's have a phone chat. I've done that with Crystal. It's really nice. Just, you know, a 15-minute or so phone chat to kind of get to know you. I think that's really helpful in lieu of being able to get together in person right now, especially like the face to a name thing. Yeah.
Thank you. That's really helpful.
Good. Call me, email me. So specifically for Siskiyou County, we have 3 main grants. There are others that kind of come and go over time, special things like COVID. I will say that our COVID funds have all been expended right now. We did a big cycle in September, so we're trying to fundraise to build that back up, but right now that one's closed. But so in the fall, we offer grant opportunities in the areas of animal welfare and also community arts, which are for public art projects. Because these have just closed and we're actually announcing grants next week that have been awarded, I'm not going to talk about those a whole lot today. Just know that those are on the radar for your organizations for next year. But in the spring cycle, which is what we're going to talk about today because it's crazy, but that's just right around the corner, is the McConnell Fund grant. You can find all of our grant opportunities on our website, which is shiny and new. So it's if you get a chance to go in there and poke around, let me know if you find any errors. We're still finding a few of those. But you can go to our website under grant and see all of these opportunities. All right, so is my organization even eligible? This is question number 1. There's nothing that breaks my heart more than to see applications come through and you know someone spent so much time on them and they're not eligible. It's like that assignment in elementary school where your teachers tricked you and like it says all you need to do is put your name on this paper and then there's all these hard questions. It's that kind of thing. So make sure that you're eligible first. We award grants to public charities, so nonprofits, also public entities. So if you know of anyone working in the schools or parks and rec districts, we do fund those too. So spread the word. And also to be eligible, you have to have all of your past grant reports that are due in. So this one is tricky too. And if you are wondering if you have any outstanding grant reports, if you're maybe not sure, just drop me a line and we can look that up. And we also do send out letters a few times a year too saying, hey, you missed a deadline. You can't do anything until these reports get in. So that's really important. And then also you have to comply with our non-discrimination policy. This is mostly that if you have programs through your nonprofit, that they're open to all different types of people, not just one particular group. And then we require that projects be completed within a year of the grant receipt. Now, this can vary a lot. And in COVID years, I can't tell you how many people have called me this year and they're like, I know it was due in 12 months, but crazy. So that's fine. We work with you. We get it. All right, so let's talk about the McConnell Fund. Raise your hand if you know and love the McConnell Foundation and all that they do in Siskiyou County and in the North State. These fine folk have touched so many places. I feel like every time I go to Mount Shasta, you know, I go to the ice skating rink or go to Lake Siskiyou, these places, and you see a sign that's like, hey, McConnell Foundation helped with this. Well, the McConnell Foundation is an entity, have pots of money that they do their own grant making out of, but we here at the Community Foundation handle all of their kind of regular grant making. So what that means is once a year in the spring, we open applications for the McConnell Fund. It's throughout 5 counties and Siskiyou is one of them. And yeah, so we manage a really big portion of their grants. Now, I wanted to be really clear, and I think it's so great that you guys just talked about this before this segment about admin, operating costs, program costs, because in this particular fund, those unfortunately can't be covered. So this is that fine print that it's really good that you just take a look at before you get in and start working on an application. So for the McConnell Fund here at the Community Foundation, grants are primarily awarded for equipment or building projects. So these are things like, you know, if your organization needs a giant tractor for something, or maybe a new roof on a building or a new HVAC system, or things like that, kind of big ticket items, that's what you want to think of for the McConnell Fund. Also here we kind of list out their genres, arts and culture, recreation. Probably most of your organizations are going to be qualified in that way. It's kind of everything. But every year we see applications come in for this that's really not equipment or building related projects. They're things like program costs, expendable items associated with programs like paper and things like that. And those costs really aren't allowed. So let's see, is there anything else I want to focus on this? I think that's it. And kind of my biggest hint for the McConnell Fund is that they really like to see a strong volunteer component. So they like to see organizations working together. They like to see that you have volunteers working on your project. And here's the real kicker. The ice cream sundae of your project, they want to come in at the end and be the cherry on top. So for example, let's say that you have that you're building a barn and maybe you have everything all together except for the flooring, and the flooring is the last piece you need to make the barn go up. If you can show that the other parts have been already covered, paid for by other means, and you just need the flooring and they can help with that, that's going to be really competitive for them to come in and finish off that project. So again, when you think of the McConnell Fund, equipment or building stuff and the cherry on top. All right, you guys with me? I'm moving quick, gonna get out on time. So how do I apply? Well, some of you, I see some familiar faces on here, which is really fun. And then I see people I don't know, which is also fun. But for some of you who have been with the Community Foundation for a long time, know that we used to do paper grants. And then a few years ago, we switched over onto online grant applications. So these are all in the cloud. It's through a system called Smarter Select. And it's a pretty user-friendly system where you can go in, create a login, start your application, and then leave, go walk your dog, feed your cat, do whatever you need to do, come back the next day and keep working on your application. So it's pretty nice. Here at the Community Foundation, because we are in the grand scheme of things, we're a smaller funder. We're really focused here in the North State community. We try and keep things very simple. And so we like to think that our grant process is a lot easier than if you were going for like a federal grant. We've tried to make it as simple and easy as possible. And each year we think even more because again, I'm a grant writer. My colleagues have all done grant writing. We still do grant writing to get funding here at the Community Foundation. And so we know that it's a lot of work to put together a grant. So in sum, we are simply looking for One, big picture info about your organization. So we want to know a little bit about the history of your organization, who's in your board, the overall financial organizational health. And this is, again, where it's good if we've maybe met and had coffee or had a phone chat. When I'm reading this to have some context, it just really kind of brings it to life. I can go, oh yeah, that was George. I'm with you now. We also want to know simply more about your project. So our fancy grantee word for this is project narrative. But truly, we just want to know more about what you are hoping to do through your project. And so we tell folk, just speak from your heart and be as clear as possible, and less is more. So sometimes we get in grant applications and we maybe have like a box for a paragraph where you describe your project, and it's totally full with lots of text. And then at the end of it, we're like, what is this actually for? And we can't figure it out. So we have to go to the budget and see what is actually being proposed for being purchased. So we don't love that so much. We're simple folk. We like it simple. So just tell us in clear, concise wording what you'd like to do. Also, it's super helpful if you've received a grant in the past to just briefly call it out, like in one line, so that we're not confused. And I should clarify here, I don't have it in my notes, a grant from us, from the Community Foundation. Because sometimes what happens is we're sitting with other staff and community members that are reviewing these applications, and we go, gosh, didn't we just give them computers? Yeah, I think we gave them computers like last year. Well, if we gave them last year, why would we do it again? And so if you say, thank you for the computers we received in 2014, then we could go, oh yeah, that was actually in 2014. So those are probably getting old by now. And it just helps us speed things along. So that would be really helpful. We also simply want to know how much money it's going to cost. Fancy grant word, project budget. And I know you guys have been working really hard on this afternoon. So my biggest pro tip here for budgets is if you've done any kind of pricing research, we really want to know that. So please put that info into either the budget or into the narrative. What I saw a lot this spring, and again, I'm new here at the Community Foundation, so this spring was kind of my first cycle for the McConnell Fund, but we'd see budgets that didn't have any statements like we sought out several quotes or things like that. And so we'd look at the costs and sit as a panel and go, gosh, that seems really high. Does that seem high to you? Yeah, that seems like a really high cost. Gosh. And so if you can let us know that you did shop around and that this was the best price, or maybe you didn't shop around because you have a really outstanding relationship with a longtime vendor who's been in your community for many years and they're the only vendor, that's fine too. But just let us know that you've kind of done your due diligence in rounding up the costs. Then we don't have any reason to go, that seems high, or wonder if they shopped around. And then finally, we request in our applications that you submit photos. And this is just because pictures are worth 1,000 words. Sometimes it just helps us as human beings when we're reviewing these stacks of grants to see some pictures. So we ask for both photos and communication pieces. The communication pieces one is interesting. Between you and me, our secret here is that we like to see that you're rallying support for the project. That's why we ask for things like communication pieces. And that just means a scan of a recent newsletter or a scan of a social post, because we want to see that this project is something you've been thinking about, maybe rallying support for, not just with us at the Community Foundation, but with other partners too. In terms of photos, there's a lot of photos that can be really helpful, but specifically for the McConnell Fund, which is the one we're focusing on today, I'd say photos of things like, if you need a new roof, show us like the current state of the current roof. That really helps. Sometimes when we see photos like that, it's like, oh man, yeah, Yeah, they need that. That looks bad. And so again, it just really helps bring it to life for us, especially in this era where we're not able to field trip around as much to the different sites. So as you can imagine, between this big picture info, more info specifically about the project, how much it's going to cost, some photos to bring it to life, this is still, even though we try and keep it very simple, a lot of information. And then multiply that by the many applications we receive each cycle, and it's a lot. So we just humbly ask that folk don't submit additional materials. Also, that can create kind of an unfair playing field in which we're using to judge projects. So I like to try and keep it even and fair. All right, so what happens next? You give us all of this information, you submit that online. What happens on the back end? Where does it go? Why does it take us so many months to get back to you? Well, here's what we're doing. The first step is we do our due diligence to make sure that your organization is qualified. So we check a number of places, but predominantly GuideStar, which is a website, you can Google GuideStar, and also the California Secretary of State. So my advice is anytime before you apply for any grant here at the Community Foundation, you get on GuideStar and you get on the California Secretary of State business search and just do a quick search for your organization and make sure everything pops up good. We had an organization this fall that submitted several applications and they were so great, and oh, it broke my heart because they had an issue with their charity standing in GuideStar because they had filed incorrectly the last time they were renewing their IRS verification, and it was just very sad. So check those first. Just make sure. I can send you those direct links if anyone's interested. Just email me. After that step, and we've made sure that you're qualified, we actually have panels of volunteers. They're members in our community who, alongside staff, review the grants. So I love this because it takes out any weird stuff like, you know, I'm going to get to know Megan really well and send her chocolates and then she's going to award the grant. Doesn't work like that. We usually have anywhere between 3 to 6 volunteers from the community that help us review and make these decisions. And they're just wonderful. They change over every few years. You might get a call from us one day saying, hey, you want to help us review grants once you've retired from your fundraising work. So once those volunteers and staff have read all of the applications, we combine all of our questions. So a lot of times we have the same questions, but sometimes we don't. We compile those and we typically will either call or email you with those questions and say, hey, this wasn't really clear. Or can you give us a little more information about this? And sometimes we also do site visits, especially for the McConnell Fund when we're looking at buildings. And we were able to make this happen in the spring with masks and distancing and all of that good stuff. So we'll just have to see in the future, but sometimes the next step is a site visit. And then once we've gathered all of that information, maybe seen the site, have all of our questions answered, the panel of volunteers get together, usually for a few hours in the afternoon, and we deliberate. It's really fun. We go through each grant and kind of talk about its merits, if it's a good fit, and we make decisions. So as staff, we facilitate that conversation, but we don't really have a say. So the decisions are made by the community members, hence Community Foundation. They are all eventually reviewed by our board, just for good measure. And then after that, we send out award and denial letters, typically by mail, typically to the director, not the grant writer. I know that's confusing sometimes because as the grant writer, you're like, wait, the letter went to the CEO, and at larger organizations, it can be like, I never heard, but it's important that the CEO sees it and signs off on it or knows. So we just like to make that really clear. And this process usually takes about 3 months. I have to say, I'm super stoked because this past fall with those animal welfare and community arts grants, we actually did this in 2 months. So we know that there is a lot of need right now, and we're trying to get stuff out the door as quick as possible. But I hope this sheds a little bit of light on what we're doing between the time you submit the application and the time you hear back from us by mail. So almost done here. What if I get a grant? So yay, you jumped through all the flaming hoops, you get a grant. What's the next steps? So we send out that contract by mail. Your organization signs it, sends it back, and then we cut a check from there. That's one thing I love about the Community Foundation is it's not, you know, for most of our things, it's not like you spend money and then we pay you back, and then you spend a little more money and we pay you back. We just cut you a check up front. I think that's amazing. I love that. And then you have 12 months to complete the project and submit a final report. So there's so many funders out in the world, and we all have different reports. I know that's kind of a pain, but I wanted to share a little bit about the types of things that we're really looking for in our reports here at the Community Foundation. So there's a number of components. Again, we try and keep this very simple. Again, this is done in Smarter Select, our online system. But because we are rallying donations here and then give out grant money, we have funders that we report to. And what they primarily like to see are photos, quotes and stories. They want their hearts warmed about the awesome good work that you did with the grant. And so you give us these quotes, stories, and photos. We especially love front-facing photos, not people's backsides. We like faces. And we turn those into stories that we then share with our funders. We also share them on social media to rally more donations into the funds. So here's a few social posts that we did the past month or so. These are based on grant reports that we received. One's from a spay and neuter organization here in Shasta County. The other one is from the YMCA here in Shasta County. And you can see they had just given us some nice forward-facing photos that make you feel really fuzzy inside. We love that. And then we also need to show our funders and our auditors how the funds were spent. So I just have a little clip here. I know you guys have been talking about budgets all afternoon. But what we really love here at the Community Foundation is if you take the original budget that you submitted with the grant, and then you update it with exactly what was spent. We like to see them together if possible. So like the original budget, and then right next to it in Excel, what you spent. So that we can see, you know, did they spend what they said that they were going to? Was there money left over? Did they overspend? And if so, how did they rally the rest of that money? And it really helps us kind of fill in any gaps in that knowledge. You can see in this little example here, there wasn't in kind, but I just want to echo what Meredith was talking about, that we love to see that in kind for all of our grant opportunities here at the Community Foundation, because it does show us that you are working hard to rally support in a number of different ways, including donations of stuff or donations of time. And if I don't get a grant, these are pretty competitive, so that does happen sometimes. Sometimes it is simply because there was not enough money to go around and it was a worthy project. Other times there are pretty specific things that we are happy to share with you on maybe why it didn't rise to the top. And so I just want to let all of you know that if in the future, if you do apply and don't receive a grant, do feel free to call or email me, and we're happy to share that feedback. I think the phrase is fail forward, right? Like if something's not going to happen, you want to learn from it. And so that's kind of my job, is to help you get better. And we want to see awesome applications. And so it's really our job to kind of give feedback, and we're happy to do that. Then you're not wondering too, like, I worked really hard on this. Why did it not go through? So we're happy to do that. Do try again in future rounds. Again, sometimes it's just, you know, the state of the world, what's going on, how much money is available. So do keep trying. And this is kind of cool. Something we do here at the Community Foundation is for those grant projects that are qualified but weren't actually selected for a grant. We take those, write a nice emailed list, and we actually share them with our fund holders. So these are private donors who hold funds here at the Community Foundation. This is that matchmaking component where we matchmake donors with potential projects. And we say, hey, here's some great projects. There just wasn't enough money this round. Are any of you interested? And it's so fantastic because for them, it's kind of like a fun Christmas list or a shopping list, and they get to see the need that's out in the community and kind of pick and choose where they might want to help. So I just love that because it's like a round two, like a bonus, you know? And kind of the last thing, if you don't get a grant from us here at the Community Foundation, is to know that grants are just one slice of the fundraising cake. I must have been hungry when I did this presentation because we're talking about cherries on top of sundaes and cakes. But really, grants is just one piece of the puzzle. It's also important to seek revenues from individual donors through events, through a number of different diversified revenues. We've seen this year a lot of nonprofits that were relying really heavily on events, and then we saw what happened with COVID. And so when I think about nonprofit fundraising, I think of that old phrase, don't put all your eggs in one basket. Diversify it as much as you can. So questions. Oh my gosh, I'm still wearing the same shirt in this picture. You've got to be kidding me. This is clearly my favorite shirt. But anyways, if you have any questions, we maybe can take one right now, or maybe it's just better because it's the end of the day and I know you're on a tight schedule. Please do reach out. You can email me. My phone number is also at the bottom of the screen. And I would just love to chat with you, get to know your organization a little bit more, hear what you're working on. And I really encourage all of you to apply in the spring for the McConnell Fund grant. We usually open that up in January, and they're typically due in March. So in January, make sure you're checking our website to see when that opens and get ready. All right.
Well, thank you so much, Megan. And I can just hear in your voice that you really do want to meet with folks in the class. So can we actually share your presentation with the folks?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. You're welcome to share.
Okay. Yep. If you'll send me a copy, then I'll make sure that we get it out. So
that sounds great. Thank you so much for the opportunity to, I know we didn't get to have much of a two-way chat today, but I hope that this was helpful for all of you. And I really look forward to getting to know you in the future.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay. And everybody, good luck on the budgets. If you get stuck or you want to send me a version to preview as you're working on it, I'm happy to help with that. And the one-pagers, since Megan is still here, they've all actually produced the communication pieces. So let me just guess that you would be very happy to receive those from folks in the class.
That would be awesome. I love that. What a great class. You guys are getting real life homework. I love it.
So when you're ready for your one-pager, then start. Now we have two program officers, Levi from the Ford Family Foundation and Megan, who would love to receive it. So here we go. Okay, we'll see everybody for our last session next Thursday. Kathy's going to send out a worksheet in advance. It's 10 common site visit questions. And I'm going to ask you to think about your project in your organization and to kind of prepare answers in your head, because we're going to do an exercise where I will ask the questions and we'll see what types of responses we get. So thank you all. Have a good week. Happy budgeting.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Thanks, Crystal.
Thank you. Farewell.
Thanks, Meredith. And the YouTube, we do search under your name for your videos.
I will have Kathy send out the links. They're unlisted links for the sessions. So you'll need a link to get to it, and I'll have her send those out.
Okay, thank you.
Do you want them now, or do you want to wait till all of the sessions are over?
Whatever works for you.
Okay, I'll get today's uploaded, and then we'll send out the links for the first 3.
Okay.
Okay.
Thanks.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks, Kathy, thanks, Meredith.
Arthur, you're frozen.
Oh, I'm still here. Oh, real quick. You only want one budget form or the other, not both. Is that right?
I wanted to give you 2 templates because there are plenty of people that don't know how to use Excel. So if you know how to use Excel, use that.
Yeah. All right, will do. All right. Well, I will see you next week.
Okay. Thanks, Arthur.
Take care.
Yay. Okay. You know what, Kathy? I'm gonna go ahead and stop the recording, and then I'll give you a call.
Okay.
Okay?
Good deal. Mhm.
All right. Thank you.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye.